So we're done with stored procedures and we're moving on to user-defined functions. And user-defined functions are typically designed to perform a single task. They return one value when they're done. And you can actually return any type of value. It does not have to be an integer like stored procedures. When you use the return statement in a stored procedure like we did up here, where we returned invoice count, what you return has to be an integer. But in a user-defined function, you can return whatever data type you want. The limitation to a user-defined function is we don't use output parameters, which means you can only return one thing. And user-defined functions like stored procedures can accept input parameters. Okay, so you can send a user-defined function some input, and it will return one thing using the return statement. Okay, and typically if you're creating a function and you want it to do more than one thing, that is an indicator that you need more than one function. So we're going to create a couple functions just so you can kind of see how they work. And our first little scenario here is our boss would like us to create a function that returns vendor ID when given the vendor's name. Okay, so we're going to give it the name. It's going to return us the vendor ID. Quite often it's easier to remember a vendor's name than it is to remember what their vendor number is. Okay, so this is going to be a pretty short little function. And I'm going to go ahead and enter task 2 in here. We're going to be using the AP database for this. And the command is create function. It is kind of a naming standard to put FN in front. Okay, so that would be your function name, vendor ID. And we have a vendor name variable, variable character 50. This is returning an integer, but it doesn't have to be an integer. Okay, just this example is returning an integer because what we're returning is the vendor ID. And vendor ID is an integer up in our AP database. So we kind of take a look at our tables, and we take a look at vendor, columns. Vendor ID is an integer. That is what we are returning. Vendor name is what we are passing. Okay, so vendor name is our input parameter, and it's going to return the vendor number. So you can see that we have a return statement, and it's simply a select, and we are selecting the vendor ID from vendors, where the vendor name is equal to this vendor name variable that we are going to receive when they call the function. Okay, so this is our function. We're going to go ahead and create it. And where it stores that is down here in the programmability folder. I'm probably going to have to refresh this so you can see it. And here is the functions. Now this is returning one value, not a table, just one thing. So this would be a scalar valued function. And here it is. So I'm going to move that closing comment down. And now to run this, typically with a function, you would either have it as part of the select, or you can have it in a where. So if we wanted to display the vendor ID, and maybe we didn't know what it was, right in the select, we can call this function, send it the vendor name, and it will return the ID and display it right in that location. In this example, what we're going to do is we're going to display the invoice date and the total invoice for the vendor IBM. So we are going to be calling our vendor function in the where statement. So we're going to do select invoice date, invoice total. This is coming from invoices. And the vendor ID is in the invoice table. So where the vendor ID equals, and let's say we just don't remember what the ID number is, but we know it's IBM. So we're going to use database object dot function name vendor ID, and we're passing it IBM. So what it's going to do is it's going to call this vendor ID function that we just created. It's bringing in IBM, and what it's going to return is the vendor ID from this little select statement. So it's going to look specifically for IBM and return the vendor ID number. That's going to go right in this location. So it's going to check for the vendor ID equal to whatever IBM's vendor ID is. So we're going to go ahead and run it. Okay, and you can see that it actually found a couple of invoices for IBM. And what we're going to do is we're going to change IBM just so you can see how it works for somebody else. And we're going to change it to United Parcel Service, which is UPS. And we're going to run it again. And you can see UPS has quite a few invoices. Okay, so at this point, you can kind of see how that works. So we're going to move our closing comment down, and we're going to do another one. Our boss would like us to retrieve products using the product ID. And this is a query that the boss would like to do multiple times per week. And if they're going to do anything more than once, it is a good idea to create it as something that they can run over and over again. So we've decided to create this as a function. And we're going to be naming the function FN products. And this one is going to use the Northwind database. And we have to create the function FN products. And we have to give it to the product ID. And that will be an integer. And for this one, it is going to actually return an entire table. So we're saying returns table. So this is the function, okay? The parameter that we're passing is the product ID, and it is going to return a table. Oops, table, not tables. Okay, then the actual return statement is the result of the select. So we're selecting multiple columns, everything from products, where the product ID variable that they pass is equal to the product ID that is in the products table. So we're going to say products dot product ID. Okay, so we are returning multiple columns, which makes it a table, from products when the product ID that they pass is equal to the one that is in the products table. Okay, that is our function. So we're going to go ahead and execute it. Okay, and this was added to Northwind. So if we went down and looked, and I'm probably going to have to refresh this. There could be some existing functions in here as well. And we said this was a table, and we can see products is right in there. So I'm going to go ahead and move my closing comment down. And so for this, we actually have to send it a product ID. So we're going to execute this a couple different times. And when we execute it, we are going to be sending it different product IDs. The product IDs that are in the product table are 1 through 77. You can execute it with whatever product IDs you want. You should run it 3 times. And so I might do, if you want to do just like I have in the textbook assignment, you're going to pick 10, 20, and 30, but you do not have to do it just like that. You can pick 3 completely different numbers as long as they are between 1 and 77. Okay, so we can run it like this. Well, of course, I have to put a dot in there or it won't work. Here we go. Now it should work. Okay, so having a bad typing day. FN products. Here we go. We'll try this again. It will work this time. There we go. Yay. Okay, so we have the product ID 15, 25, and 35, and you can see the results. And if you wanted to be just like what I have in the textbook assignment, you will use 10, 20, and 30, and those would be your results. Okay, so as you can see, functions do come in really handy, especially if it's something that you're going to run over and over and over again, because you can put them right inside your selects and they will return the results. So we're going to go ahead and move that little closing comment down.